The Technology History Podcast. Exciting stories about the development of technology by Christian Steinbach. Hi everybody, and welcome to the second episode in English of my Technology History Podcast. I'm a German teacher and I'm interested very much in history and in technology. In addition to my numerous visits to technology museums such as those in Sinsheim, Speyer and Munich, this was also due to many encounters with fascinating people and books that took me into this world. So I started this podcast last year in German language. After 18 published episodes, my wife had the idea of translating some of them, which are interesting for people in other countries, into English. So this is episode number 2 in English, entitled Who Was Actually the First? And now, let's go. The food for thought dates back many years now. I sat in a circle with my second graders on the first day of school after the summer holidays. Everyone was allowed to talk about their holiday experiences. As always, I was last in line. And indeed, I had something great to tell. I had my paragliding license in my pocket for just a week. That's why I was able to tell what it feels like to stand on a large mountain meadow in the mountains, the paraglider prepared and checked. Finally, it's my turn. I put the glider up with a gentle tug. Another check, a few quick steps, and then the ground disappears. The wind whistles and the world is at my feet. In the middle of my narrations, I was surprised by a girl's question. Mr. Steinbach, who was actually the first person to fly? Of course, I then talked about Otto Lilienthal, who made his first gliding flights with his apparatus on a hill near Berlin over 100 years ago. In 1891, to be exact. I didn't mention that the last one of them went terribly wrong 5 years later. With that, the question was answered and everyone could happily go to the break, for which the bell had already rung. On the drive home, the girl's question came to my mind again. Did I answer it correctly? At first, the thing seemed so clear. Every child knows that Lilienthal was the first aviator. But things are actually not that simple. It is of course undisputed that Lilienthal actually carried out successful gliding flights from 1891 onwards. There were witnesses to this and even some photos as evidence were taken. But was he really the first? I had to think of Albrecht Ludwig Berblinger, the famous tailor from Ulm. What is known about him is that he built a flying machine with which he wanted to cross the Danube in front of the audience and the king in 1811, which he famously failed to do. He survived his fall into the river, but his reputation was gone. What is relatively unknown, the ability of Berblinger's device to fly was proven in the 1980s. And he is said to have attempted to fly in vineyards that offered good conditions, unlike the river. My long drive home made my thoughts wander even further. What would it actually look like if you were to ask this question to a Frenchman? He probably wouldn't think of Lilienthal, and certainly not of Berblinger, but rather of the Montgolfier brothers, who succeeded in the first manned flight in a balloon in 1783. Strictly speaking, not them personally, they had built the balloon, but Pilatre de Rossier and Dalande. Well, in the eyes of many people, a balloon ride is something completely different than a flight in a fixed-wing aircraft. But why actually? After all, you move through the airspace equally with both types of devices. By the way, lawyers see it the same way. The Air Traffic Act applies equally to balloons and fixed-wing aircraft in Germany. But even the fact that the two Frenchmen mentioned were the first balloonists or pilots can be doubted. A few years ago, I bought a yellowed paperback at a flea market. It was published in the USA in 1977 by Jim Woodman and is entitled NASCAR. Woodman has found archaeological evidence that the Indians of ancient Peru may have carried out balloon flights. He also built a similar balloon and demonstrated its ability to fly. But back to the fixed-wing airplanes. Who was the first aviator also seems to have something to do with which country you are in. The museums in Germany celebrate Otto Lilienthal, in the USA the Wright brothers and their powered flight of 1903, and in the Musée des Arts et des Métiers, Clément Ader's steam-powered airplane is on display, with which Ader is said to have achieved a flight over 50 meters in 1890. As a child of the 80s, my dreams reached much higher from primary school age onwards. The space enthusiasm of the 1960s was still somewhat present in society, and I firmly assumed that one day or another I would fly into space on a space shuttle mission. While we are on my favorite topic, who was actually the first person to reach space in an airplane-like spacecraft with rocket power and then land by gliding and not on parachutes like in the 1960s? No, it wasn't astronauts John Young and Robert Crichton who made the first space shuttle flight in 1981. As early as 1963, test pilot Joe Walker reached an altitude of over 100 kilometers twice with a rocket-powered X-15 experimental aircraft. Let's now leave aerospace and look at another area, automotive technology. The engineers Carl Benz and Gottlieb Daimler are often called the inventors of the automobile. It is undisputed that both independently developed petrol-powered vehicles in 1886 and found detailed solutions that were incredibly innovative at the time. Part of the truth is that as early as 1769, the Frenchman Nicolas Cugnot built a steam-powered vehicle which he demonstrated publicly and which, in the true sense of the word, was already an automobile, a self-propelled vehicle. After all, it was powered by neither muscle nor wind power. It is not the case that an automobile necessarily has to run on gasoline, diesel, gas, or electricity. Using these examples, I have shown that the seemingly banal question, who was the first, in the history of technology is often very difficult or impossible to answer. But maybe that's not so important. All of the people I have mentioned were undoubtedly brilliant engineers who have enriched humanity considerably with their innovative thinking and developments. But we have to accept, even shortly after the Olympic Games in Paris, that technology history works differently than sport, that there is often no first, second, or third place. This was a second episode of the Technology History podcast in English, entitled Who Was Actually the First? If you enjoyed the podcast, I would be very happy about a subscription. And maybe you know someone who is also interested in this topic and to whom you would like to recommend my podcast. Finally, my thanks go to Walk-In Music from Pixabay, whose song I was allowed to incorporate into the intro. Thank you for your interest and see you next time on the Technology History Podcast.